Good morning, everyone. We are really thrilled to be here. I'd love to welcome you to the 2020 Beyond Business as Usual conference. We are just so thrilled to be here and really looking forward to what I'm sure is going to be an engaging and very lively discussion with our incredible panelists and with you, our audience. A little bit about Reset. We believe here that every business should prioritize social or environmental impact alongside profits, and we see entrepreneurship, and particularly social entrepreneurship, as a tool to enable more inclusive prosperity. In our accelerator program and incubator programs, our entrepreneurs are making connections and practicing the skills to create a more diverse and inclusive workforce and to solve our world's toughest problems. And if you're interested in learning more about how you can either get support for your own business or get more involved with Reset, you can reach out to us via our website, resetco.org, or send a private chat to Emily Reisner or myself right here in the Zoom room. And I know we have some of our alumni on the call today, which I'm so happy to have you all here as well, joining in the conversation. So we chose this year's topic for BBOW, as we fondly call this event. This topic is leading for change because we are in the middle of a completely seismic shift as a society. And right now, leaders of all stripes are being called on to enable the changes that we need to create a future that works better for everyone. COVID-19 has proven beyond a doubt how inextricably connected our business world and our economy is with the health and well-being of our communities and our planet. So as we pivot and create solutions in this really difficult time, it's going to be absolutely essential to evolve towards systems and structures that actually prioritize more regenerative and more sustainable growth. It's also Employee Ownership Month this month in October, and so we're really excited to also have the chance to explore some really creative solutions to building that more sustainable and resilient business landscape. Give me one moment here to share my screen again, because, whoops. I would be remiss if I did not thank our sponsors, who also really recognize this sea change that's happening right now. We're incredibly grateful to our gold sponsor, Webster Bank, which is also a strong supporter of Reset's social enterprise programs, and to all of the many sponsors and supporters of this morning's event. I'd also like to recognize the partnership of Jen Grace, the founder of Publish Your Purpose Press, which is also the state's newest certified B Corp, and to Jen Gorin of Impact Growth Partners, both of whom have been really integral to making today possible. Also, big shout out to Emily Reisner, Jeff Devereaux, Nader Cassis, and the entire Reset board, who have been just incredible in putting this together. And of course, our speakers, who you're going to meet a little bit later, are calling in this morning from all over the country to share their experiences with you. And I am just so excited and honored to have them here. To kick things off, I'm actually just going to welcome our moderator, who will then introduce the rest of the panelists. So I'm immensely grateful to all of you for joining us today. You've already heard all my gushing about why. So I'll just introduce Nydia Shipman, who is the co-founder of the Worthy Company, and I can vouch personally for how great their products are. It's a great alternative to smoothies and yogurts. And Nydia has agreed to come in and help moderate this panel. She herself is also a B Corp certified company, so has a firsthand view of the challenges and wonderful opportunities of going through that process. So Nydia, thank you, and take it away.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm so thrilled to be here this morning with everyone. And I'm just going to dive right in because I think we have a lot of wonderful things to cover. I have three amazing panelists this morning, Lorna Davis, Alexandra Horigan, and Rahama Wright. And I could tell you so many wonderful things about them, but I actually think that it's more impactful to hear from them themselves, what makes them passionate about what they do, what makes them tick, why they started their companies, why they're passionate about impact. And so I'm just gonna ask if Lorna can kick us off this morning and tell us a little bit about herself and what she does.
Thanks, Nydia. Hi, everybody. It's lovely to be here. My name is Lorna Davis. As you might be able to tell, I'm originally South African. I guess I bring the sort of big corporate perspective on this game to today's conversation. I spent my whole life in corporate. I was the president of Nabisco, the North American biscuit business, a few years back, and realized that profitability as a single mechanism for evaluating businesses was not where my heart was and where I thought the world should go. So I rejoined Danone, a French food company, which I had worked for before, to help them move their business to the next level of sort of social impact. It was there that I discovered B Corp. B Corp is in my opinion, the only really powerful mechanism for an alternative set of metrics for business to ensure that business is a force for good. I came back to North America and was the CEO of the North American Danone business, you call it Danone, when we bought White Wave. We made that business a public benefit corporation and then a B Corp. It's now the biggest B Corp in the world. I'm now an ambassador for B Corp globally because I genuinely believe that the transformation of capitalism to a fairer, more equitable and regenerative system is the most important single job we have. And so I spend my time speaking about how we might do that. So I'm delighted to be here with so many of you who are already on that path. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Lorna. And I can't wait to get back and ask you some more direct questions about some of the things that you've brought up in your opening. I'd like to move on to an intro of Alexandra Horigan. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Happy to be here, and good morning to everyone across the country, coming to you live from northwestern Montana, so early here. So yes, I'm Alexandra Horigan. I am VP Strategic Initiatives and a founding team member of a socially conscious financial firm called Aspiration. We offer banking and investment products, all with a socially conscious and really kind of environmental commitment to them. So on the banking side, we've got fossil fuel-free deposits. We allow tree planting when you do roundups, carbon offsets. We launched over 5 years ago, really with the mission of providing financial equality, and have, continued to iterate on who we are and what we do as a business. But social consciousness has really always been, the primary factor, the driver of all of the decisions that we've made in our business, from the partners that we choose to the actual products that we launch and the order that we do that. So I've, been there from the start, helped us develop and really helped us kind of lean in, working on everything from initially becoming a B Corp to the launch of our sustainable metric product called AIM, which helps you actually realize the impact of your dollars every time you spend your money. Many people don't think about the power that you have just sitting in your wallet. And that's an incredible thing that we have really, really focused on, the power of a dollar, what your money is doing when it's working for you, and how you can make it work for the things that you care about the most. So my journey to Aspiration, I actually started on Wall Street, and this was a story that I had shared yesterday when we had this little pre-call, and had spent 5 years on Wall Street, and was in my 20s and enjoying New York City, and really realized that there was so much more, that I needed to be doing so much more, and that working for a firm that was only helping other big firms make money was not where I needed to be. And so joining Aspiration and being able to really lean into this kind of social impact space, which since then has really developed in an incredible way. So it's been a really fun ride being part of a company like that since day one, and watching the ecosystem kind of grow and mature, and people be more interested in how they can drive change through their companies as well. So yeah, I guess I bring the fintech startup idealistic angle to it, to this conference.
Nothing wrong with that.
For having me.
Thank you for being here. And I'm so excited and thrilled to introduce next Rahama Wright.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Rahama Wright, and I'm the founder of Shea Yeleen, a DC-based social impact business I started after serving in the Peace Corps. And I'm so excited to be with you all this morning, talking about how we can use business as an agent for change globally is my jam. It's what gets me up every day. So it's wonderful to be a part of a community where everyone is caring about the same things and caring about the same value. So I started Shea Yeleen in my early 20s with absolutely no business experience. I literally had no business starting a business. I didn't know anything about marketing, product development. I didn't even know what a P&L statement was or a balance sheet, none of that. All I knew was I had just finished 2 years serving in a small village in Mali, working at a community health center, and frequently seeing women coming into my health center and leaving unable to buy medicine, leaving unable to pay for basic health services. And that really affected me. I felt that I was only doing a partial solution being there as a Peace Corps volunteer. What people in my community needed was financial resources. What they needed was living wage jobs. And so I started researching income generating activities. I learned about shea butter, never knew that shea butter came from Africa. It's actually a fruit that grows on a tree exclusively in sub-Saharan Africa. And women are the traditional harvesters. They're the ones who go out every harvest season, they collect this fruit, bring it into their communities, and then they go through a traditional process of making a product called shea butter that can be used in all types of skincare products. It's used in chocolate making. It's become really globalized. But as this product becomes globalized, women in these small communities are on the fringes of the supply chain. They're unable to financially benefit from a product that is part of multi-billion-dollar industries. To what Lorna was saying earlier, we have these corporations who have, for generations and decades, taken raw material from primarily communities of color and benefited financially. And then those communities of color struggle with poverty. And so what Shea Yeleen does is we connect the dots. We help women take the raw material, which is the shea seed, if you can see it. This is the shea seed. We help them take the seed and then transform it into products. And then we connect those products to the marketplace. We do things like organize cooperatives. We help women with training, giving them access to basic business skills, giving them access to safe production facilities, providing them access to capital. So the entire ecosystem to help them take a raw material, turn it into a value-added product, and then connect that product to a Whole Foods, connect that product to a small natural independent food store, connect that product to a spa here in the US. And by doing that, by developing this business, we help women increase their income by 5 times their country's minimum wage. And this gives the women the ability to live at a higher standard. It gives them access to the financial resources that they need to send their kids to school, to be able to access health services, to invest in other income generating activities. And so I get really excited when I talk about this model, and I know that everyone here is operating in some way that helps to connect the dots between communities who historically have been disenfranchised by the global economy. And the reason I get excited about it is that, as someone was saying previously, we truly, I think it was Alexandra, we truly do not know the power that we have. We can recreate and reimagine a new world where everyone, regardless of where you live, regardless of your nationality, your religious practice, whatever, everyone can live at a better and higher standard where their needs are met. And we are the ones who are able to make those changes. So again, I'm really excited to be here and can't wait to dig in with all of you. Thank you.
Rahama, that actually leads me into a question that I want to ask you. So I'm just going to keep you on this topic if you don't mind. I mean, our current economic system is really designed primarily with financial growth in mind. And so you started speaking a little bit about what it would look like to have a truly equitable economy. And I want to just ask you to just elaborate on that a little bit more, how you would see having a more equitable economy and a benefit that benefits us socially and environmentally more than our current financially focused system does.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, thanks for asking me that question. I think it's pretty simple. We need to start valuing people more than we value profits, like full stop, period. And how do we do that? We do that by creating business models that center the health of people, that center and value everyone's work, regardless of gender, that center and value the fact that the current systems of capitalism were created by people. It's not, we just didn't magically all end up where we are today. People created these systems and people continue to perpetuate these systems. My focus is primarily in Africa because for me, Africa is not a poor continent by any stretch of the imagination. The way that African resources are utilized are to the disadvantage of local communities. So whether we're talking about diamonds, gold, oil, cocoa, shea, whatever you can think of, the continent of Africa has the highest percentage of natural resources compared to any other continent. So one thing for me, when I talk about this issue of financially empowering women in these communities, I want to change the perception that Africans are poor. We need to stop perpetuating that falsehood. A lot of Africans in their communities are oppressed. A lot of them do not have access to the tools and the resources and the systems to financially benefit from resources that are literally in their backyard. And so when you ask me this question of how do we create a more equitable global financial system, we have to, one, look at it globally. It cannot just be in my neck of the woods, on my block, in my state, in my county. We really have to think about it from a global perspective. And so for me, when I am working with these communities as partners, this is not a handout, working with them as partners and helping them to take their own resources and transform that into something of value. So that's where, for me, that's where I start. And then the other part of it is the consumer education piece. Consumers have so much power in recreating business. Consumers have so much power in changing the way that we do business because they vote with their dollars. And so a lot of the things that I do in terms of helping people understand that you buy this bar of soap or you buy this moisturizer, and the difference between supporting a Shea Yeleen and X brand over here is a woman's ability to send her kid to school versus sending her child to a market to sell goods because they need that child working versus being in school where they're being educated and can prepare themselves for a better future. So the consumer part is so incredibly important. And I spend so much time, and I've spent so much time over the last 15 years just talking about this issue of, vote with your dollar. You can help us make this change by switching the types of brands and switching the companies that you are supporting. So it's a combination of, to recap really quickly, we have to rebuild systems. We have to empower local communities to take advantage of local resources. We have to look at a global perspective, and we have to re-educate consumers.
That's wonderful, Rahama. Thank you so much. And thanks for explaining to us what you're doing. I personally can't wait to try product. I'm going to look for it. While we're actually on this topic, I want to ask Lorna, as someone who's had so much experience with working with larger companies, and I know you're so passionate about impact, to Rahama's points, and I just want to ask a question that's come up on Slido, actually. What do you do when your mission competes with your business goals? Clearly, Rahama's mission and business goals are very aligned. But let's say you don't start a company the way that she did to have this specific impact. Say you start a company to make a profit and then you also decide that you want to have a mission, they may not always run parallel. So what do you think people should do in those situations?
It's a great question, Nydia, and I love the kind of mix of panelists we've got here, because I think wherever we are is the place of most leverage. And I think Glennon Doyle says that we act where our heart breaks.
I love her. Yep.
Yeah, me too. And having I'm in the business, and I spend almost all of my time now talking to big businesses who are in exactly that situation. They started off with a set of rules with purpose sort of in the background, and are now trying to pivot. And the thing that moves me about that is it's very easy to be critical of people who are running big businesses that are on the wrong path. But the reality is that they've got a huge responsibility. They have workers, they have customers, they have suppliers in the existing paradigm. So the question is, how do you help them to shift? One of the reasons that I'm such a fan of this sort of B Corp system is that it's got three elements that really help you. The first is, because big businesses are sort of metric achieving systems, that's what they do. Creating a decent, thorough, rigorous set of alternative metrics and ensuring that people's remuneration is attached to that the culture of the organization, that the goals of the organization are attached to actual metrics is really important, because many people find it difficult to have their kind of their sort of head in one place and their heart in another. So the actual certification system of B Corp, which means you have to get more than 80 points out of 200 on a tough set of metrics, is really important. And by the way, that set of metrics allows you to have a mix between social and environmental performance. So you have a kind of a minimum and a requirement for transparency in total, which is not how big businesses normally work. And that transparency is like fresh air on mold, but that set of metrics allows you to reorient your organization in a way that's practical. The second thing is you're required to change your legal status. So the way that current corporations are set up in the US and in most of the world is that the only one group of people to whom you are responsible is your shareholders, your financial shareholders. And in fact, if you can't prove that you're doing something that meets the long-term or short-term needs of the shareholders, you could be sued. So the changing of legal frameworks for the way corporations work is really important to make systemic change. And big corporates have the power and the leverage to put pressure on governments and other people to change that legal framework so that you can have a broad set of stakeholders to whom you are responsible. And thirdly, it's a community. So if you're running a big business or you're part of a big business, I remember when I was in Danone, I went to the R&D center and we were talking about nutrition. And I said to the guy, so how do I know if I'm healthy? Because and he said, well, I'm just going to take an average of the 5 people you spend your time with. And that's pretty much a good measure of how healthy you are. And I laughed. I thought he was funny. But actually, that's true. We become who we spend our time with, by the way, and everybody on this call is thinking, I wonder who I spend my time with. Because we actually shift in the direction of the people who surround us. And one of the most important things that we did as a big organization was shift our peer group. So for example, the CEO of Patagonia, Rose Marcario, was the chair of the advisory board when I was running the North American business to become a B Corp. And let me tell you, having to speak to her about the decisions that we were making really shifted my focus. So I think it's a combination, to answer that question, it's a combination of hard metrics, legal framework, which actually holds you accountable, and shifting the people that you hang out with and that you listen to. I mean, if you just hear Rahama speak, all of us went, whoa, new perspective. And we think differently about things. And so I think the choice of who you admire and align yourself with is a very important question in this journey.
Thank you, Lorna. That's 5 people. of course, I'm thinking, who do I spend my time with? Right now, I'm spending it with my family in my house, but that could explain why I keep eating so much peanut butter, because I've got 2 little kids. Um, I actually have a specific question about aspirations for you, Alexandra. I think we'd all like to know whether Aspirations is focused on, I know you're focused on the consumer, but are you focused on individuals? Are you focused on helping companies? Companies, say, for instance, like Rahama's B Corp, very passionate, social mission type of company. I mean, how does Aspirations work with people versus companies, and do you do both?
Sure. Thanks. So right now we are actually only working with individuals.
Okay.
When we started this out, one of the things we saw was that everyday people were simply not getting the same opportunities for any financial services as corporations or, the ultra high net worth. So we started out really focusing on individual consumers with low minimums, with really just a very low barrier of entry to excellent financial products. So yeah, that is really where we are. And everything we've done has been about giving the individual consumer more power. So we've made it really easy for you to help reforest the world. Many corporations kind of have things like that built in, or initiatives. We also have corporate initiatives internally. But what we've done is make things so easy. We've made it easy for people to know about the impact, like I was saying earlier, know about the impact every time they swipe their dollar at a company or swipe their card at a company, and know the impact that their money is having. When their funds are just sitting in a bank, you don't realize what these big banks are actually doing with your money, funding projects that completely do not align with your values. Corporations often have the opportunity to direct funds elsewhere. Individuals don't. And so Aspiration really, for the first time, has given people the control in a different way. We allow people to offset their carbon footprint every time you fill up your car with gas. We allow people for the first time to invest in a sustainable equity fund with a super low minimum. Within the fund, there are all the metrics that Lorna was discussing. So really just focusing on the everyday consumer, everyday person, all of us on this call, everyone everywhere in the country that wants great access.
Oh.
I love how proudly Lorna shows off her Aspiration app. Thank you, Lorna.
That's wonderful. I can't wait to get on it. Now, I'm curious, how, as someone with a B Corp, how does your company live that culture internally?
So, I mean, first of all, we are, very much a mission aligned company. That is who we have been since day one. We encourage, we really look for people to join the company that are not just joining for a paycheck, that are really joining because they buy into this mission, the socially conscious mission, and providing a great alternative. So, everything from onboarding to internal meetings to really the internal metrics that we have. So the metrics is a really big thing. I was on a call yesterday, so I referenced the tree planting that we offer as a roundup. So instead of rounding funds up to savings, you round funds up and you plant a tree, and we send out these report cards monthly. But we're also doing things like that internally. So there's a lot of bringing in these external metrics to how we are performing as a business. And I think that really impacts the culture and ensures that people are all working towards the same goal. Thankfully, obviously, like, profits are important, but we have always, and our CEO, Andre, has always said people over profits. And that has really been the foundation of everything that we've done and built.
So as part of the mission, what are the metrics that you all have and hold to measure success then? If it's not a typical for-profit, and I know you have the mission, but what exactly is the measure of success for you?
So, there's obviously, a lot of the standard business metrics. So, clients, account size, all of those things. We are a business, we do need to run. But one of the really important metrics for us is our pay what is fair. So one of the big things about Aspiration is that we do have one product now that we charge a set fee on, but that launched only in about April of this year. So from original launch in 2015 through April of 2020, the only way that Aspiration really would make any money is when customers would choose to pay us a fee for our services called Pay What Is Fair. And so one of the most important metrics we have as a business is how well we are doing. And we are literally being rated by our customers every time the monthly Pay What Is Fair happens or the quarterly Pay What Is Fair. So that's certainly an important metric for us because that shows us how we're best, how we are serving our customers. And then, we do have things like how many people are enrolled in certain products. What is the way that people are spending their money? What is the engagement on a product like the Aspiration impact measurement, things like that.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
To everyone out there, you guys are asking some really wonderful questions. I'm going to actually pivot back to Rahama for this question because I wanted to ask you, number one, do you have investors? And number two, even though you are a mission-driven company, how do you avoid mission drift? If you have funding opportunities that come up that perhaps you desperately might need. I mean, we're all as startups in the position of sometimes saying, I really need this money. If I pass it up, am I going to find someone who aligns more with what I'm doing to give me that money?
Yeah, no, great questions. So I'll start with the mission drift. Absolutely not. I would not be doing this if the goal wasn't to financially empower women in our cooperatives and the cooperatives we partner with. It wouldn't even be worth it to me to get up and do this work. If I wanted to create body care products, I could do that. Since I started and over the last 15 years, so many more brands have launched, and there's a whole new huge movement around indie beauty products. And so if this was about just making a bunch of beauty products, you can do that without having social impact. But for me, it's how do I connect the dots between these women who absolutely deserve to have market access, who absolutely deserve to have products on shelf that represent them and represent their work and allow them to be financially compensated. This work would mean nothing to me if that wasn't central to it. And because I started Shea Yeleen, I am fortunate enough to continue to push that forward without having to answer to a board or individuals who don't have that same vision and who don't have that same commitment. So mission drift is not something, maybe if I get fired one day because I have the wrong investors, it may happen, but as long as I'm running Shea Yeleen, it's not possible. But in terms of fundraising, I'm sure you all have heard the very dire statistics. Black-owned, particularly Black women, are the most undercapitalized group in business. Less than 0.02% of venture capital even goes into companies that are run and created by Black women. I started Shea Yeleen with my Peace Corps readjustment allowance of $6,000 roughly. That's all the money I had to my name after returning back to the US, and then bootstrapped for almost 8 years. And, borrowed money from my dad, my brother, worked several jobs, 2-3 jobs, sometimes part-time jobs, just so I could maintain my schedule, so I could travel, to Ghana, to Mali, and not worry about having a 9-to-5, even though I did have a 9-to-5 initially when I came back from the Peace Corps for a couple of years. And then in 2014, I did do a seed round. I also had to readjust my model. Someone asked me, I think Maggie asked how we're structured. When I initially created Shea Yeleen, we were 100% nonprofit, 501c3. And then I did a pivot to get access to my first round of venture capital in 2014 and structured Shea Yeleen Health and Beauty, which is an LLC, to be able to take on that capital. Roughly between an angel round, VC round, I've raised over $1 million for Shea Yeleen. But the great thing is I still have full control of the business. I never gave up control of the business. And was, I think, lucky because I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I went from bootstrapping to working with VCs. I did not know what a cap table was. Do you guys see a pattern here? I just do things without fully understanding what I'm getting myself into. And so I guess I just lucked out, and the venture fund that I worked with was specifically a social impact fund wanting to invest in social impact businesses on the continent. So the investment thesis really lined up. Long story really short, they ended up just being silent investors, and kind of, you know, they're there, but not really. So I'm really lucky in that I get a chance to continue running Shea Yeleen as the majority owner still. And as the person who has operational and board control. So it just ended up working out for me from that vantage point. I will say this for people who may be in the early stage startup phase, it's so critically important when you're looking to raise capital to make sure there's mission alignment. It's so critically important to know, basically in the same way Lorna was saying, you know, the 5 closest people to you will determine your health. The investors you get will determine your success, really, honestly. And they can bring you down or they can rise you up. And so make sure you understand the different types of investors that are out there. Make sure you understand the difference between getting capital and getting smart capital. Make sure you understand whether or not they're there for the short term or for the long term. So these are all of the things I've navigated over the last, 6 years as a founder who has received VC funding, and happy to have one-on-one conversations with people who are traveling that journey so I can offer some of the insight I have. And I also want to really quickly go back in terms of this mission drift. I want to push back a little bit to what Lorna said about companies, these large companies, you know, we kind of have to give them a break because they have employees and things of that nature. 100% respect that. But I also think it's really important that they're held accountable for the world that they've created. It gets very frustrating, especially I've traveled to 36 countries around the world. 20 of those countries have been in Africa on the continent. And it's absolutely horrific what large multinational companies are doing to indigenous communities around the world. And so they have to be held accountable. They can't just say, oh, I'm gonna become a B Corp and now all is good. No, absolutely not. And I think for me, it can be frustrating because they get a pass, but they literally have created the environments that, you know, continue to perpetuate white supremacy, continue to keep people in incredibly poor situations. And I will just talk about Nestle for a second and the chocolate industry for a second, that continue to use child labor in their supply chains and have not figured it out yet. And it's troubling because they continue to do things and get away with it. And so I think particularly in communities like this, yes, we want to recreate and develop our own systems and develop our own business models, but absolutely these companies should also be held accountable to what they're doing and what they're creating. I don't want to take away from the companies that are doing good and, you know, are changing their methods, et cetera, but we cannot just sugarcoat it. There have been some pretty bad things that have happened throughout this world, and it typically is affecting people of color more than any other group. And so I just wanted to say that. And so why I'm so committed to not having mission drift is because of the personal connections and because of what I've seen through all of my travels that's just really wrong about how certain groups are treated in this world.
Thank you, Rahama. Thank you so much for all of that. I actually want to ask you something that, you can't avoid having this conversation with businesses and individuals right now. How has COVID affected your company, both domestically and how you work and internationally? If you could share a little bit about that.
COVID-19 has been devastating. 100%. I am part of the millions of small businesses across the world or across the country that have been tremendously impacted in a negative way. So a couple of things. Prior to COVID-19, the bulk of my business revenue was coming through wholesale accounts and retail. So we were primarily a retail business, not really doing a lot online. I had the fortune of working to develop really great retail accounts across the country. MGM Resorts, for example, was one of our biggest customers. We had a retail location in Washington National Airport that was driving a tremendous amount of sales. And we were doing well. And then March came along, then April, and then there were travel bans. So then airport industry was hugely impacted. And then there were mandatory shelter in place. And so I'm a DC-based business. And so through May, really, no one was allowed, if you were not essential business, you weren't allowed to stay open. And so what did this mean? Several of our retail locations closed in the DC area. Our airport location closed. I mean, we went from a really good day in terms of foot traffic at the airport is about 45,000 folks going through the airport. A slow day is closer to 20,000. During COVID-19, the numbers we were getting was 300, 500. So there was no one traveling. There would be some flights where there's only one person on a flight. So then it didn't make sense financially to keep that location open. And so it was just kind of like a domino effect where everything was just like being destroyed. And it was a shock initially, and I had to furlough my team members, slowly bringing some of them back now. And then, so there was that, the retail component. So roughly lost about 60–70% of revenue really fast. And then Ghana closed its borders to protect its people, which was very smart. We could probably take some notes from our country. And so what did this mean? This meant our processing centers had to also shut down. And so that meant that our cooperatives had to stay at home. People could not be out and about. And if you were out and about, you would be arrested. They were very, very strict as a way to just ensure that infection rates would be very low, if at all. And so they just recently opened about 2 weeks ago. And so working with our team in Ghana has been really just trying to make sure people are safe, making sure, we've had some scares where we think some people did get it, but because of testing, we can't really confirm. So making sure co-op members have access to healthcare, paying without really getting supply, for example, just to make sure that people are able to run their day-to-day. And just because we're impacted, we want to make sure that they're able to continue to living, really. So having to do that, which with revenue plummeting, having to cover some of those costs has been a challenge. And then really doing a pivot. And so I've been spending the last few months with my advisors and team members just trying to figure out how to become a more robust e-commerce business and supplement with retail versus being primarily a retail business. And so with that has come the focus on really doing a brand refresh, investing in a new website, and just bringing on a couple of people who really understand digital marketing. And so 2020, unfortunately, it's a wash. There's nothing that can be done to really turn it around financially. So now we're looking at first quarter of 2021 and beyond.
Before I pivot to Alexandra to ask her some questions about COVID, I would like to know, are you selling online now, Rahama? And can you put up where everyone can purchase your products online?
Yes,
in the,
yes, we are.
Chat.
But because of the supply chain issues and our processing center being down for a few months, we're out of stock on a few things.
Okay.
So when you go to the site, you will see some out of stock, but we will, crossing fingers, be fully back in stock November 1, so in a couple of weeks. But you can definitely support us by going to the website and purchasing a gift card for use later, or purchasing a soap or a lip balm, which is what we have in stock now. But yeah, literally after this, I'm going to be back on a WhatsApp call, trying to figure out doing a production run and getting a shipment out in the next couple of days. So we should be back in stock early November. So thank you for asking that.
Of course, and I see that Emily has actually put up the website, SheaYeleen.com.
Thank you, Emily.
I can't wait to go on myself and try the products. They sound amazing. And just Rahama, quickly, I'd love to speak to you at some point. We pivoted a bit as well to online. So if you want to talk about some of that, we're now up and running. So
I would love that. Thank you.
My pleasure. Alexandra, I did want to ask you, as someone who is seeing really the financial impact on individuals of COVID, what, if anything, are you doing differently at your company? Are there programs or what, can you shed any light on how financial institutions, and yours specifically, is handling credit cards and debit cards and things for people right now?
Sure. So first, I just kind of want to take a moment to chat about how it has impacted the business from the human perspective. So
please, yes, thank you.
So we, I think like many other businesses, quickly shifted to work from home. Being based in LA, obviously regulations got pretty tight pretty quick. It's been very interesting how we have kind of excelled with this remote culture that we had sort of dabbled in. I'm remote. Our CEO splits his time between California and Arizona. We now have a head of product in New York. It's been very, very interesting to see the way teams have shifted to support individual employees. And so I'm sure that many other businesses are seeing the same. I would imagine that the shift from, a retail to an online is obviously very different than moving to a work from home, but it's been really interesting to see, and also just the extra effort you then have to put in to have these human connections that you don't think about, and how important that all is. From the consumer side, it was really interesting to watch everyone kind of pause for a little while people figured out what was happening, with the world. And then we saw obviously spikes in spending when the stimulus hit. We've seen, we don't have a credit card yet. And so we're not seeing the same kind of default rates. Certainly have heard a lot about companies, going through that, changes in the underwriting and things that, that credit card companies are interested in providing. On the debit side, I can't really speak to the exact behavior on overdrafts or anything like that. But Aspiration really has always focused on not hammering people with fees, not being a predatory firm in any way. And so certainly doing whatever we can to support customers in this crazy time. I mean, 2020 has been, I personally feel like I don't even know what day of the week it is or month it is. I can't believe we're already in October. And I think a lot of people, are kind of in the same boat. And so, obviously spend, it's a little all over the place. It depends. We've shifted, I think I believe that there has been some promotions to kind of support people where they need, where they need the most support. But yeah,
Thank you. Thank you so much. Lorna, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your work with B Corp. we went through the process. It was really a well done process. And I'm curious why is it so perfectly streamlined? I don't know if you have the background to be able to see the background inner workings of it, but as someone who's tried to get approval for other certifications that should have been a slam dunk, I found it to be much more fractured, much less user-friendly than the B Corp certification. So if anyone out there is scared to do it, don't hesitate. It's really a well done, it's just so well done. I would just love to hear a little bit about how that happened.
Well, I don't think I can give a great answer to that question, but I can give you a sense of the sort of spirit behind it, because I want to make a point about paradigm. Rahama said, you see a theme here that I kind of do some stuff that I don't know how to do it, and so then I kind of find my way through. And the reality is that that's what humans do. That's how we learn to walk. That's how we, that's the game of being human. And that authentic, feedback-based, experiential way of operating is our birthright. It's our home. Big corporates have or business has sort of artificially carved it up into little bits, and has sort of approached it like, I'm not moving until I've worked it all out, in secret, by the way. I mean, big businesses are designed to be opaque.
Yep.
And then I'm only going to move when I know that I can win, basically. And if anybody's seen my TED Talk, you see I actually tackle the subject because I think it's one of the root causes of some of the perpetuation that Rahama was talking about, but that we all know.
I just want to interrupt one thing. I don't know if Emily can put up Lorna's TED Talk on radical interdependence. That would be a great thing for everyone to take a look at separately. I'm sorry, Lorna, please continue.
That's okay. So what the B Corp certification sort of process does is it forces you to ask a whole lot of questions about what it is you're actually trying to do. And what's interesting is that, about, I think 75,000 people have been on the website and have worked through the questions. And, we only have nearly 4,000 B Corps that have actually succeeded. But the questions themselves help you to basically rethink the entire shape of your enterprise. And so, most businesses have thoughtlessly gone into I'm just going to do what old-fashioned capitalism of Milton Friedman 50 years ago said, and they haven't thought about the humans, the planet, or anything else. So when you just have normal certifications, they're just box ticking, and the system doesn't change. You actually need to go right back to the very beginning of what your organization trying to do. And if you look at the history of the B Corp movement, that's what they were trying to tackle. And I think you can really feel that. And I think that it's one of the reasons that it kind of resonates with people, no matter where they're starting from, because there's a curiosity about it. And again, I think, if you look at COVID, one of the things that we've all learned is that if we thought we knew what was going on in the world, well, we didn't. And so we're now digging into our natural human ability to react from a place of purpose, values, perspective, whatever it is that drives you. So I think that you can feel that in the certification. And also they update it every year or two because they get feedback. I mean, if you look at the certification over the years, it's changed a lot. Because the community says, look, you're not tackling the issue of racial justice, or the community says you're not tackling the issue of, for example, social business. Danone has never given away money. They only give money to create businesses, social businesses. And you could get a whole lot of points for philanthropy And we said, well, we don't think that's fair. Philanthropy is one thing, but actually social business is a more powerful way to contribute to a community. And so the next update, a couple of years later, they tackled that subject. And, so I think it's a kind of a living process that, and I think it's standing the test of time.
Thank you. Do you know, is there ever going to be a shift? I know that there's a scoring platform for B Corp, and there's environmental impact, social impact, and you can be sort of relatively low in one area with your score and very high in another and still obtain B Corp status. Mm-hmm. Is there ever in the future, do you see ever a shift to requiring businesses to have above a certain score across all categories in order to be given B Corp status?
Yeah, I mean, even now, if you take the question of, I mean, there is a minimum now across the board. You can't just be, brilliant in environmental and abysmal in social impact. But it's a kind of a subtle balance. And if you speak to the guys who are doing that work, they're constantly trying to make sure that there's a minimum, standard for everybody, but that people can really double down. So, for example, the ownership of businesses. There are many companies whose environmental record is not bad, but it's not extraordinary, but they're, wholly owned by the people who work in the company. And so they really get big points for that. And I think that's cool that there's a flexibility there, that you don't have to just, it allows you to work within a framework, but to be specific in a strategic sense for your business, your circumstances. So, I mean, it does, and I think that those standards are going up all the time, but I think it's part of its strength that you can double down in areas that work for your business.
I'm going to take a quick look and see on Slido. I think we have time for one last question. And actually, I think sometimes we learn the most from our mistakes. So maybe I can just open this up. 10 minutes left. I'm going to ask all three of you. So maybe each of you can take about 2 minutes. I'll start with Rahama. Like, where did you bomb? Where did you make a huge mistake? And how did that actually help with your mission ultimately, or help you define your mission better ultimately?
Geez, are you sure we only have 2 minutes to answer this question?
Just for now, and then you're welcome to go on about it with everybody in post. But yeah.
Gosh, I feel like looking back, there have been so many mistakes because I started off with just so little knowledge and understanding of how to build a sustainable social impact business, and so I really have been learning along the way. And I think, I could answer this from more of the, systemic, operational, I categorize this expense in the wrong category, or, something like that. But I think I'm going to answer this question differently, because I think that we don't often talk about the emotional impact of being a leader. And we don't talk about the psychological impacts of being a leader. And so I would say the awareness I have developed around how I was operating in this world without addressing issues of trauma, issues of how I was seen in this world as a Black woman, how that came out in different ways and manifested in different ways in terms of, sometimes not being patient enough to hear the other side, or pushing forward an agenda that needed a little bit more buy-in from other people. But that was all manifesting in certain ways because I was not dealing with trauma. And trauma shows up in everyone's life and in so many different ways. And so I think that as I've become more emotionally mature, and as I've become more aware and become more emotionally intelligent, that has really been the game changer in terms of me being able to even speak and own my voice and own my experiences and not be afraid to be vulnerable, not be afraid to share things that I think, in my 23-year-old days when I started Shea Yeleen, I would not have even been able to have some of the conversations I'm having now. And so I share that to say, as we are leaders, and many of us working in areas that have some very tough things that we're dealing with, it's really important that we understand and are willing to understand certain aspects of ourselves and how that contributes to and shows up in our leadership skills and our leadership ability.
That's wonderful. I agree. If your gas tank, as I call it, is empty, how can you go out and support, your business or the people who work with you? Alexandra, I'd love to ask you that question as well. Feel free to answer it on a personal level, on a business level. We'd love to hear it.
I started out by thinking of a business, kind of a business case, a thing that had happened in the past. And I'll really briefly just touch on that. There was a point in time where we truly didn't realize how important it was for us to be able to control all of the levers on products for our clients, that thinking that we could partner with someone else who, who ultimately got to decide the customer journey was an okay thing. We shifted gears in 2018, and that was an extraordinary experience, realizing that we needed to own the whole thing, because otherwise we could not be the company that we want to be. So I don't know that we bombed. I would say it's more of a learning experience. But then I heard Rahama speak, and the thing in my mind was all of those years of just living and breathing this thing personally, like this thing becoming my life, and allowing myself to become so worn down. And then, I think for many women, or for many men, for many people, the thing that shifts is when you have children, and suddenly your world changes. You change your perspective on what's important, and you start to realize exactly, what Rahama was saying. Your tank you cannot support anyone. You cannot fill anyone else's cup if your cup is empty.
Exactly.
And I think that has probably been the biggest learning. And again, I don't know that it's a place that I bombed. There's certainly many places that I bombed that I'm not, unfortunately, not too comfortable sharing with this broad audience. But I think that's the case as a human, right? You feel like you need to give and give and give until there's like nothing left. And that, I think, just as a leader, is a really important thing to realize, certainly as a parent too.
I think that's universal, and it's so true. And why is it that when we're in our 20s, we don't realize we're doing it, and we don't speak about it, so we don't realize we're not the only ones doing it, and and then you think it's how everyone's supposed to be doing it.
Yeah.
Lorna, I would love in these last few minutes to ask you about that, please.
Well, I'll keep on the same theme. And I think as I look back on my career, and I'm 60 years old now, I am really sad that it took me so long to realize the power that I had. So in the early days of my career, I was just grateful to have a seat at the table. I was apologetic and schmoozy. I remember one of my bosses saying to me, "I noticed that you treat men as if they're your father or you flirt with them." And I remember being shocked and upset, and then realizing that he was right, because those are the only two mechanisms that I had learned really as a young woman to kind of get things done in the world. And as I got older and more and had more leverage, I didn't understand how much power I had to change the system. And now I'm trying to make up for that. But the thing that I plead for everybody who's on this call is to have a really good hard look at how much power you do have. And it's probably a lot more than you realize you have. And use it well, because the future of this of a society that we all dream about in our hands, and influencing it from wherever you are with as much leverage as possible, it is is the only route to the transformation that we're all looking for.
Thank you so much, Lorna. I want to say, Alexandra, did you want to add something?
I do, if that's okay, quick.
Of course.
Lorna, you just triggered something else, on the power thing, and I very much still struggle with knowing that. And one of the mistakes that I continue to make is I always think that someone is going to know something better. And obviously there are subject matter experts, there are people
yes,
that do. But I, as the first employee, I'm the person that truly knows the business, knows every nook and cranny. And, 7 years later, still do not give myself credit for actually knowing the thing. Even again, subject matter experts, I don't pretend to know everything, but I was thinking that someone coming in with a fancy title or a different college that they went to, or an MBA or previous experience, and just saying, oh, well, they know, they know it better. And, Lorna, if you have any words of wisdom on how we can really own our power, I'd be very interested. But I just, wanted to share kind of how that resonated.
It resonates with me too. And again, I thought maybe I was the only one. I want to thank Alexandra, Rahama, and Lorna. You are all wonderful businesswomen. You are wonderful people. Your missions are strong and vibrant and speak to us all. And thank you for being so inspirational and very real this morning. The thing I can't stand about panels sometimes is that you don't really get to the real person who's speaking. And I feel like we got to know all of you well enough to connect after this, hopefully. And speaking of connect, we are gonna have, I think, a 5-minute intermission, and then you'll get to go into a breakout room. And I'm going to turn this over to Sarah to tell you a little bit more about that. Thank you very much. It's been my privilege to moderate this panel.
Thank you.
You did a great job moderating.
I'm feeling just so inspired by all of you brilliant women on this first panel. And I love seeing just what's all coming out in the chat box of our audience. The chat is a great way to also show your applause to just, I know if we were in a room, you'd probably have a standing ovation right now. This was absolutely amazing. And I thank you all. I know we could probably spend a few more hours on all of these topics, but we are going to have to move on momentarily. So with immense gratitude, I welcome our panelists to continue with us, but I know you may also be moving on to the rest of your day. So hopefully folks can connect in future on other platforms. And we will take just a couple minutes. We're going to take 3 minutes and come back at 10:25 on the dot. And then we will repeat this process with our second topic, getting a little bit more into the weeds. So take these couple of minutes, go grab some refreshments again, stretch your legs, and we will be back momentarily. And again, thank you to our first panel.
Thank you for having us.
Kickoff panel 2, which again, I cannot thank these folks enough. We've got, once again, people calling in from all over the country here. And so to begin, I'm actually just going to introduce our moderator for this panel, Onyeka Obiocha, who I am so happy to have guiding us through this conversation. And Oni has been involved in Reset in a number of ways as a partner with Breakfast, Lunch, and Dinner, as well as in his role at the Yale Sci Center for Social Innovation, which is just very exciting to have you here, Oni, to guide us through. And I'll let you kick us off, and then the panelists will introduce themselves as we get going. So thank you again, and take it away.
Great, Sarah. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited to be here, and more importantly, I'm excited to hold space as we gain some wisdom from the esteemed panel. Before I jump in, I'm happy to give an opportunity for the panelists to go into a bit further of introduction, but I just want to start by giving a bit context as to who they are. Allison Hooper is the co-founder of Vermont Creamery. We have Carolyn Edsel-Vetter, who's the Cooperative Business Support and Outreach Officer at Cooperative Fund of New England, and Camille Cannon, who leads Purpose's U.S. nonprofit and supports businesses on converting to steward ownership. So thank you all for being here today. And Allison, I just want to jump to you, and Caroline and Camille have the opportunity to answer the question as well. But Can you just give us a bit about your background, a bit about your story, the mission
Sure.
of Vermont Creamery, the organization, and anything else that can provide context for the people on the line today?
Sure. Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. And it's great to be here. The first panel was really very inspiring. My nickel story is I was a college student in France, my junior year abroad, needed a summer job, worked on a farm in Brittany, milking cows and goats, making cheese, butter, and all this wonderful dairy products, and thought, gosh, I love doing this, and Americans don't have this, and eventually wandered up to Vermont from my native state of New Jersey. And I met my business partner and we started Vermont Creamery. I would say our mission is quite simple. It's about bringing delicious and consciously crafted dairy to the American table. We were in our early 20s, woefully undercapitalized, absolutely naive about business, had no supply chain, had no customers, and really were starting from absolute scratch. And over the years, we just happened to be in the right place at the right time. In the 80s, Americans started to travel, eat wonderful cheese, and become very into wine. And we were a pioneer, I would say, in the goat cheese category in the US. So chef by chef, we grew the business, consumers started buying it, and it was slow, but it became a 33-year overnight success. In the context of B Corp, just quickly, these were not part of our vernacular in the early 80s. We didn't think about sort of mission-driven businesses. We were just, the business, I would say, is really living your own values through your product and what you do. And so it was very simple. We made decisions based on what we thought was the right thing to do, not necessarily what was the most profitable thing to do. And certainly we didn't have a lot of profits to protect in those days. So it was a very organic method of showing up to work every day. And I think that really leads to the authenticity of our mission and sort of protecting the values of the business. So I will stop there and let the other panels introduce themselves.
Great, thank you. Caroline, you want to go up next?
Yeah, thank you to everybody, and especially to the first panel. That was really fantastic and a nice way to spend my morning. So I'm here sort of with two hats on. One is in my current role, I'm the cooperative business support for the Cooperative Fund of New England, which is a nonprofit community loan fund that's been making loans to co-ops of all varieties since 1975 throughout New England and parts of New York. My other hat is up until 2 years ago, I worked for A Yard and a Half Landscaping, which is a business outside of Boston that is mostly Salvadoran workforce. And in 2013, we had the opportunity to buy the business from our boss when she retired. So I'm here to share a little bit about that story. And really I feel like it sort of exemplifies the opportunities we see for worker ownership in terms of just creating opportunities for folks who've been systemically excluded from finance and business, which I think, a couple of people already alluded to what it's like to have a business idea and be undercapitalized and not have personal assets. But when we join together, we have those opportunities. So, want to share a little bit about the cooperative model, in particular, the ability to use co-ops and co-op conversions as a way to maintain mission impact as we transfer to the next generation of owners.
Perfect, thanks so much. And Camille, along with your bio, can you just give us a quick vocabulary with your background? Just tell us a little bit about ESOP, steward ownership, co-ops, so we can all be on the same page as we continue this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, thank you so much for setting this up. I'm disappointed that I'm in California because I missed the first panel and joined in the last 5 minutes, and it sounds like you all were having a lot of fun. So I'm glad that you're having a good start to your morning. My name is Camille, and I co-lead Purpose US. We're an international organization, but we've been active in the US for the last 3 years. And our work really focuses on steward ownership, which is a label that we invented to make something that was already happening more visible in the world. And I usually tell this in the opposite way, but I think for this context, I'm going to kind of start with who we work with, because I think that it will help ground the structural elements, which can be a bit boring or overwhelming, I think, depending on how they're presented. So our work really focuses on a couple of key demographics. One are baby boomer business owners who are looking towards succession and are looking for alternatives. They don't want to have to sacrifice their legacy in order to achieve liquidity. And they also care really deeply about their company's relationships with employees and other stakeholders. And there aren't a lot of evergreen perpetual structures available to them. And so we've worked really deeply with over 20 business owners to craft ownership, governance, and financing structures that enable them to exit their businesses, but also ensure the long-term independence of their companies. So that's one segment of people. The other is that we work really deeply with startup founders who are often social entrepreneurs. They want to change agriculture or technology or healthcare or some other systems issue. And when they go out to the market to raise capital, what they find is that the options available to them are really intended for unicorn tech companies and often undermine the mission and objectives of their businesses. And so we have been working really closely with companies over the last year or so to raise capital on alternative terms. And that can take a lot of different shapes, and I'm happy to jump into what that looks like, but it's really about how do you raise capital on non-extractive terms that are aligned with the long-term ambitions and strategy of business. So I'll give a brief vocabulary of the wonderful world of ownership. You mentioned a couple. One is the cooperative. There is a long history of the cooperative movement in the United States. The primary form that we see are single stakeholder cooperatives like employee cooperatives or farmer cooperatives or retail cooperatives where one group has ownership and financially benefits, and in many cases, participates in the governance of the business. One worker, one vote is a very common governance framework, but they also become much more complex if you look at a company, for example, like Organic Valley, which looks a lot like kind of a traditional corporation, but within the cooperative form. There's also now multi-stakeholder cooperatives that bring together a diverse set of stakeholders to participate in the ownership of a business. Then there's the ESOP, which you mentioned, which was adopted in the 1970s. It's a primarily succession plan that provides a tax incentive to exiting founders. It works through a debt mechanism and provides basically a retirement plan for existing employees. It's popular. There are about 5,000-ish ESOPs across the country. It's a harder structure for smaller businesses, but there are lots of enterprise examples of ESOPs, primarily in the Midwest, but also in other parts of the country. And then the structures that we work with are called steward ownership. They include many forms, and the primary distinguishing factors across all the different firms that we work with are that steward ownership companies are self-determining, which means that control over the business is held by people inside the business or closely connected to it. And that principle is really about disrupting the default setting of capital coming in and acquiring a proportional amount of control to the amount that they're investing, and ensuring that employees and community stakeholders also have a seat at the table. The other aspect is that profits serve purpose. So after paying back capital providers, profits are reinvested in the company and shared with stakeholders. What this principle is really driving at is that the company is no longer a commodity which can be sold or from which value can be extracted into perpetuity for private gain. And then lastly, I think this is really the place where these forms differ from ESOPs or many cooperatives, although Equal Exchange is a unique example, and public benefit corporations, is that these forms fundamentally redefine what the fiduciary duty is of a company. We work with a trust structure, and we're really redefining the underlying framework by which businesses are making decisions. So whereas in an ESOP, the trustee of an ESOP has a fiduciary duty to maximize value for employee shareholders, in these structures, a purpose could be about the long-term mission stewardship and independence of a business and stakeholder inclusion and yada, yada, yada. So I'll stop there. That's a lot of information, but happy to answer any questions.
No, that's very helpful, and we are getting some questions in the chat. But before, and that was a very good variety of definitions. But before I kind of want to jump in, I want to go back to Allison very quickly. And Allison, can you tell us more about your decision to turn Vermont Creamery into a B Corp? I think with the definitions now, I want to start thinking about what does this look like in reality? What does it look like to operationalize these? What does it look like from an organizational management to an incorporation to anything in between? How is that process for you?
Sure. So we became a certified B Corp in 2014. And my thinking around that was based on a number of things. I wanted to codify some of the practices that we had embedded in the business as founders. I wanted to create more awareness of it, of these values throughout the company and in particular the management team. Historically, just to give you an idea about Vermont, Vermont in the 80s and 90s had the most active, largest SR business group in the country, and very much inspired by Ben and Jerry's. And we spent a lot of our efforts on influencing public policy. So I would spend time in the State House as sort of the alternative business voice for raising the minimum wage. We weren't even talking about paid family leave. We were talking about earned family leave. We got involved in gay marriage. We got involved in parental notification of abortions. We got involved in a lot of environmental protection, development laws, and we're kind of seen as these sort of wacko hippie business owners, but it was a very important time in sort of the SR business movement. And we felt like we were really making real change, not only within our organizations, but in our communities. And so I did that separate from sort of my company, if you will. I mean, I did it as an owner, as a co-founder of Vermont Creamery. But what concerned me was, here I was running a company that was a pretty working class, blue collar business. Most of our manufacturing employees did not have a college degree. And so I really wanted to expose them to the founding values of the business. And I felt like I was going to Montpelier, to the State House, fighting for systemic change that was going to affect their lives in a positive way. I'll give you an example. There was a young guy working for us in production, very sweet young man. He's probably like 19 at the time, drove a big like F-250 pickup truck. And he had a bumper sticker, on his truck that said "Hybrids are for douchebags." And I was driving my little Prius, and and very proud of that. And I would park right next to him in the parking lot. And I don't think he knew whose car that was. But, you know, I joked with him about it, and he was very contrite, you know, and I think he got some, you know, I didn't want to school the kid, but I think it was the exposure to other ways of thinking about the world. And this was how I wanted to try to influence or help employees think about how people not like them think about the world. And so the B Corp kind of helped to do that. So, you know, it was a way of also really putting on paper and articulating many of the things that we were doing anyway, although it really made you be very clear about your governance structure, your hiring policies, really looking at the diversity in your business, which is an ongoing difficult situation in Vermont, because we're a very white state. And so, you know, it helped to create a higher level of consciousness throughout the organization.
That's very helpful. Thank you. And Caroline, what was the experience like for you going into a worker-owned cooperative and having that transition? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the scale is obviously really different. Worker co-ops tend to be a good structure for smaller businesses. But, you know, when we did the conversion, we were 20 people, about a $2 million business. And really, our first priority was sort of our internal tagline was "We change lives." But what we were really trying to do was preserve the livelihoods and experience of our coworkers. The former owner, Eileen, had really built the business around investing in an immigrant Spanish-speaking workforce and treating us with a level of respect that we don't get in the landscaping industry. Really working to promote internally, send people to lots of training, develop good benefits, develop competitive pay. In an industry that, you know, has a lot of exploitation, frankly. And so when she started talking about retirement, we all knew that if she were to sell to an outside buyer, our way of life would go away, that wages would get cut, people would be just treated as, you know, the guy in the truck. And we didn't want that, and she didn't want that. She had really invested in us and seen us as partners in building the business to the point that it was. And so thinking about becoming business owners was really scary for most of us. We had not seen ourselves in that role. But becoming a cooperative meant that we got to sort of share the load. So, you know, we had the benefit of being able to each sort of play the role that we excelled at, and also to pool our resources to go in for financing rather than having to capitalize that ourselves. And we, you know, we really started by preserving the livelihoods that we had and making sure that we had the opportunity to continue to have a safe workplace, to grow professionally, and also to reinvest in the business. So in a worker co-op, unlike in an ESOP, there's a pretty direct financial buy-in by the employees, and also dividends get paid out potentially as you go rather than only upon leaving the business. So a bunch of my coworkers sent the first kids in their family to college using dividends that came from the growth of the business, bought their first homes, started a second business to provide more jobs within the Latino community. So we really felt like the goal of keeping the business sort of in the family as it was number one. But also, you know, it's been kind of cool. Now we're 6-7 years out from the conversion. we really have shifted some things within our industry in terms of being one of the first businesses to have organic operations and really keeping that within the way that we do things, and pushing the wage scale and creating some competition within our market. So I feel like we had a lot of opportunities beyond just what we did for our coworkers and our clients. I'm rambling a little bit. I'm sorry.
No, this is all very helpful and very intriguing. And I just want to go over to Camille very quickly, looking at the Slido questions. Camille, when you're advising these businesses, what do you ask them to consider before deciding which form they want to take?
So we, I think, take an opposite stance. The ownership world, which is a small world, has been very form first for a long time. And we look at legal forms as a bunch of tools that can be used, but it really depends on what you're striving to achieve. And so maybe a cooperative is the right form, maybe something else is the right form for you. And so when we start our processes, it's really a question of, what do the current owners need if we're talking about a business in succession? What do they need financially? What's possible for the business so that you're going to leave the business in a healthy position? And what's the objective in terms of profit and control distribution going forward among the stakeholders in your business? And who are those stakeholders? Because it varies very, very greatly from a business that has been around for 40 years, that's working in a really complex supply chain, may have a different set of stakeholders sitting around the table than a bakery around the corner. And so our objective isn't to say, hey, this is how you do it, we've figured out the key. It's more, what are the new frameworks that we can think about for building long-term intergenerational community institutions through businesses.
Powerful, that's very helpful. Thank you so much. Allison, let's start with you. When thinking about scaling, if that's something that came to your mind either before, during, or after the B Corp process, what was your relationship with investment at any of those stages? Did you find it easier, more difficult, a separate set of due diligence? What were some anecdotes in the conversations I traveled with folks who might not have gotten it? Any insights into that as well?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so just to give you a little background, we were an S Corp, and we had about 20 shareholders early on in the mid 80s. We were running out of cash rapidly and needed to refinance our business to maintain our banking relationships. And we grew our business over the next 25 years through debt financing. So we didn't go to capital markets to grow and scale. We only grew at a rate that we could afford to could afford the debt. And while that can have challenges of its own, it meant that we were not beholden to investors or getting into a layer of very sophisticated investors, private equity, which we were really not interested in inviting into the fold. So, as we scaled, most of our scaling decisions, frankly, were based on a lot of the way in which the workplace would change for employees. Introducing automation made their jobs more valuable. It enhanced it enhanced the workplace. We did an open book management process, which was absolutely transparent with the finances of the business, so that the employees became very dialed into CapEx and EBITDA. They understood margins, they understood EBITDA, and they took a lot of ownership in the some of those decisions and how they executed their jobs. It also had a lot to do with our supply chain and how we were able to stimulate milk production of goat's milk in our region. So scale probably had more to do with creating a sustainable business that sort of addressed sort of human satisfaction, shall we say, much more so than, of course, returning equity to shareholders. Our shareholders didn't really care they cared what we did, but they were always very happy with whatever we were doing. So
yeah, that's very helpful. And Caroline, I would love for you to answer the question around kind of financing through both of these hats. One, through your working cooperative, and also through CFNE and the process of securing financing there, what you all look for and what that process looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. With cooperatives, one of the principles is autonomy and independence. And so there's a real concern for making sure that financing happens in a way that doesn't tie the hands of the co-op members to be able to make decisions democratically. And what that's generally meant is, debt financing. Thinking about, worker co-ops in particular that have scaled up, like Equal Exchange, like Namaste Solar. They've done a lot of sales of preferred shares. Food co-ops do that also. So shares that allow you to raise capital from your community, but maintain voting control within the membership. On the opposite end, something that we're really looking at right now, and going to the point about non-extractive financing, is how do we finance startups? Financing a conversion or a going concern is easier because you've got a lot of business history. You can see, yes, this model's working. It's got a loyal, buyer base. But startups are riskier, and one of the things that we're seeing as a loan fund is that sometimes we don't want to encourage startup co-ops to take on debt. We really want them to find other alternatives. So what can we do to connect them with something that's more equity-like, or is equity, or is even grants and subsidy, particularly when you're talking about co-ops being started by Black and brown people, by low-income people who don't have personal assets, can't necessarily go to the rich uncle or the college friend or whatever for that startup funding that so many people use to start their businesses. So, we as a loan fund, what we do is debt, but we try to be non-extractive in how we do our underwriting. So we're never looking at the individual assets of any of the co-op members. We're not doing credit checks. We're not, by and large, taking personal guarantees. We're certainly not going to ask anybody to put their house on the line. We're really looking at sort of the strength of the business and helping them think about what are other ways that they can create and leverage community investment, whether that's, doing equity crowdfunding or traditional crowdfunding or other stuff to sort of launch without putting themselves at risk.
That's super helpful. Thank you. And Camille, kind of coming back to you very quickly, because you have, I would say, a systems view of the different ways of incorporation and steward ownership, what are some areas for improvement or opportunity in the industry that you see? I mean, we've talked about the kind of silver tsunami with the baby boomers looking to sell off their businesses. We've talked about the importance of worker-owned cooperatives and benefit corporations as current financial instruments or core areas of incorporation. But what's next on the horizon? And what do you see now that individuals and policymakers have the opportunity to improve?
There are a couple of points that I'm really excited about. One is, when we started a couple of years ago, we were really focused on businesses. And what we've seen happen, particularly over the last 2 years, is that the questions that we're asking when we talk about ownership and financing, which are really the questions of who is controlling and who's benefiting from assets, that those are systemic questions in our society. And they're being asked by people who are trying to figure out, How do we do community ownership of assets? How do we do community ownership of housing going forward? How do we do ownership of user data? How do we, like, these questions can be found throughout the economy. And what's really exciting is that there's a renaissance of sorts, and we're very much on the bleeding edge of it, but there are so many examples of people leveraging elements of these tools to really recode how capital is coded in the law, which I may just be a geek, but that's really cool in America. Like, we have such a system that just perpetuates the default, and to have all these folks really trying to figure out how to do things fundamentally differently, and also run a bunch of experiments to be able to answer the question of what actually generates community wealth, what generates community equity, what assets should be in the commons, and how does that benefit people's health and livelihood. These are deep intergenerational questions that we're facing, and there's so much possibility in the experiments that are being run.
That's really beneficial, thank you, and that's really important to know. And then, Allison, for you too, looking at the B Corps and the B Corp experience, what are some areas of opportunity? What are some warnings that you would tell folks who might be interested in looking at that transition, some hesitations you might have? I don't want to paint this as all good. I know it's a very beautiful process, it's important, but obviously there's some things that might not be so sunny.
Well, there are a couple things. There's first of all, what are the things that you have to be, you got to become a B Corp because you believe in it. And one of the hazards of these types of certifications is, you know, the problem of, you know, sort of greenwashing, I guess you could call that B Corp washing. It should not be a marketing tool. You don't do it to enhance your brand, you do it for the right reasons. And that's something that you need to be mindful of. And I always told my employees, you know, do the work, don't talk about the work that you're going to do or talk about all the great things that you're doing, just do the work. And if nobody notices, so what? You know, you can feel good about the good things that you're doing. I think that's a hazard that B Corp and B Lab needs to be on the lookout for. In terms of transitioning the business, we haven't really talked today about the difference between a benefit corporation and a certified B Corp. The benefit corporation is embedded in the bylaws and typically has a board of directors that protects that aspect of the business through transition. Our company was not a benefit corporation. We came to this late in the game and did the benefit, gosh, bleh, the certification. Now, in a certification, if you sell your business, the future owner can keep it or ditch it. You know, there isn't any guarantee that that the parent company or the next owner is going to embrace your that effort to maintain this certification. So there is that difference. And of course, if you are a benefit corporation, it may limit the buyers that you are going to attract to your business if they are feeling that, oh, we're not so sure about this, we don't know what it is, we don't want to be hampered by these bylaws. I guess I'll just leave it at that. Yeah.
No, that's really helpful. And actually, can you take it a little further? I know you were able to sell Vermont Creamery. Can you talk a little bit about that exit, what that looked like for you and the scope of this landscape?
Yeah, so we when we presented our company and we went to market, we were open to all kinds of investors, be they a strategic investor, which would be a larger company who buys Vermont Creamery. We looked at certain types of family funds or private equity that would have some alignment with our mission. I think in the process, it was interesting that the suitors sort of broke down very differently in regard to their interest in B Corp. Interestingly, the private equity suitors were very interested in B Corp, surprisingly. And because I think they really understood much more implicitly the value of how consumers buy from values-driven companies. And it may have been more from a marketing and branding standpoint rather than, you know, sort of doing what's right, for lack of a better word. The European strategic buyers were very interested in B Corp, and I think that certainly Lorna talked earlier this morning about sort of larger corporations. I think that in Europe are much more attuned to carbon, you know, measuring their carbon, doing, you know, having higher level of consciousness in the world than the Americans. At the end of the day, we sold our business to Land O'Lakes, a dairy-owned, farmer-owned cooperative in Minnesota. What was most important to me was keeping the business in Vermont, how they were going to treat our employees, how they were going to treat our farmers. They came in with the most compelling arguments for that.
That sounds great, and congratulations again.
Thank you.
Carolyn, can you talk a little bit about the challenges and opportunities you see both as financing worker-owned co-ops and having been a part of a transition and what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it follows pretty well from what Allison was saying, especially talking about sort of the experience with Land O'Lakes, because, you know, cooperatives at their root, their charter is to exist for member benefit. And that's a pretty broad charter. It doesn't necessarily bake in some of these things about environmental impact or even necessarily good jobs. So the Co-op Impact panel conference is happening right now also, and there's been a good conversation happening over there about should there actually be another co-op principle that's about equity and inclusion or around solidarity, because of the fact that, you know, depending what industry a co-op is in and who its members are, they may not be thinking about the welfare of workers, of, you know, are they gentrifying, are they being part of gentrifying a community where they're located, all these kinds of things. So, I mean, I think it's really interesting to see sort of hybrid, you know, co-ops that are going for a certified B Corp status, because I think it does a nice job of melding those different interests. But I think, you know, for anyone who's a selling owner thinking about preserving mission impact, you have to know what guarantees there are and are not around converting to a co-op. You know, again, Allison's point about how much do the employees really get it in terms of the overarching values. If the selling owner is really the one who holds all those values, you may want to think about other ways to bake that into the structure, or to really take a longer road before converting to make sure that the employees are really on board with that. We talk in co-op conversions about that. It's kind of a three-legged stool when you're doing these conversions of you're transferring management, you're transferring ownership, and you're transferring governance. And the nice thing is those don't have to all happen at once. So in our case, you know, we took 5 years to really do the entire transition process, starting with transferring over the day-to-day management and really the ownership, the financial transaction happened last, because people needed time to get trained up and get comfortable with the idea of exercising their voices democratically. So I think that when you go from thinking about having all of governance, management, and ownership be in one person and that person's head to transferring it among many owners, that can be a long process, and it's worth making sure that you have good help to navigate that. Let's see, and then from the financing end, not to toot our own horn, but cooperative fund, and somebody mentioned the Working World and the Seed Commons. There are a handful of financiers that are co-op friendly, but it's just in our traditional sort of banking centric financial environment, where we want to know who's on the hook if the deal goes south, and sort of who's putting up the collateral and so forth. When you look at a group of distributed ownership, it makes a lot of lenders nervous. So I think just continuing to build out the opportunities for alternative financing like CFNE, like the Working World and Seed Commons, is really important, as well as continuing to get creative about what alternative capital forms and more inclusive capital forms there are.
Yeah, thank you. That's really important. And I think Alice and Caroline, you both touched on an issue that I want to bring out a bit more, in this idea of how do we think about anti-racism, implicit bias, kind of a liberation solidarity economy through this work. Camille, feel free to jump in as well. I mean, it's really open to anyone. These structures, they're financial instruments, there's opportunities for incorporation, but oftentimes, and to no judgment value, no fault of anyone, I think there's some deep structural issues that business has opportunity to heal. And what can that look like, or what should that look like in this space if it's not already happening?
I have a great example that we just did in Oakland that I think demonstrates what's possible. And it's of a bakery here around the corner from me, Firebrand Artisan Bakery. Matt, the founder, started the company 12 years ago. It's grown considerably. And about 2 years into his operations, he partnered with a community organization to focus their employment exclusively on folks who were formerly incarcerated and formerly without homes. And he's spent the last 10 years really developing a framework for how to work with the systems in the community to support people in reintegration, how once they're in the business to help them build equity through open book management as well as accounting courses. And so when he made the transition to steward ownership, which he just finalized about a month ago, it was really important to him that both community members and employees had a seat at the table in governance, and that the mission of the business, as much as it is about baking bread, which Matt breaks delicious bread as well, it was actually that the company was a vehicle for offering quality. It does sound like Greystone Bakery, and Greystone Bakery was Matt's inspiration for this as well. But he took it a step further and giving employees a seat at the table, in having community organizations that are focused on reintegration and community health also have a seat at the table. And he included both in the profit sharing, and raised $2.5 million from investors, was able to negotiate with the investors on what does it mean to invest alongside other stakeholders, such that investors get a fair return that is risk adjusted, but that employees and community members aren't excluded in the process of that investment. So, yeah.
That's very helpful and powerful. Thank you so much for sharing. And Allison and Caroline, do you have anything to add, or any points that you've seen or actually would like to see in the industry that may not may not be here now?
Yeah, I mean, our experience with A Yard and a Half was that stuff has changed a lot, even in the last 6 years. When we did our conversion, as a Latina, I ended up doing a lot of just the bridge building and both the linguistic, but also just the cultural translation for our worker owners, because at that point, sort of the co-op ecosystem and the business development ecosystem was not designed around language justice, was not designed around people who didn't have a college education. And so I feel like we're starting to get to the point now where there's more awareness. And, I think we at TFNE, we're definitely trying to build more bridges within just the conventional business development ecosystem and communities of color to make sure that there is sort of culturally appropriate technical assistance, and that we're not like, saying you have to come to us and be loan ready, quote unquote, meaning that you know how to put together a really slick business plan and a bunch of, 3-year financial projections. When you're, a group of Latinas trying to start a house cleaning co-op, like you're not, that's not you. And yet that's a very important goal, particularly right now in our country with the employment situation, the political situation being what it is. So I think, the work that Reset and people within its ecosystem are doing also is really important to sort of, how do we start building out business for non-traditional business owners?
That's very helpful. Allison, I think you want to say something as well.
Yeah. Well, I got to say, we got a long way to go in Vermont on this subject. We are probably one of the most liberal states in the country, and this is the world of Bernie Sanders, and yet we have some sort of deep embedded racism here because of sort of the innate biases that people have in rural America. And so companies here are struggling. I have not worked at Vermont Creamery for several years, so I'm not familiar with their immediate addressing of this issue. I know that they are doing lots of training and working on strategies for this, but I also sit on boards of other companies that are really trying to figure out how to address this without doing a training and saying it's all done. So, it will take some time here. I'm so grateful that this is finally happening. And I think that Vermont will struggle with it for a long time because we do not have a large population of color, and just creating an environment where people of color would like to work and live is the place that we have to start. So yeah, it's I wish I had something profound to say, and I don't.
No, that is profound. I think that the environment in which folks operate is just as important as anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So we have about 5 minutes left, starting with Camille and then Allison and ending with Carolyn. Just for the 50 plus people on this call, what are some main takeaways that you would like to leave them with, that you would like to have them more about? I know there's been a vibrant conversation in the Zoom chat with the resources. Please take a look if you haven't already. But outside of that, what are some final words you have for this audience right now?
There's so much potential in all of this. I think the thing that we shouldn't do or should strive not to do is limit ourselves by thinking that we have to be incrementalist when it comes to envisioning the future of our economy, because we can't we can't be incrementalist. We have to act in very, very bold ways. And I think that particularly in the United States, business has proven to be both a force for good and also a force for so much destruction. And there's really an opportunity, I think, particularly as we face the challenge of climate change and racial inequality and systemic racism, that the models that we implement in business today can help model what the economy should look like in the future. So.
Thank you. Allison?
I think I would like to consider a sort of more personal message. One of the questions, the preliminary questions, was about how to coach business owners who are thinking about retiring or transitioning their businesses. I would say it is a highly emotional, very, very difficult process. If you have time on your side, that's always the best way. It's never too early to think about various scenarios, particularly if you're looking at an ESOP or a co-op, or just for your own personal transition of your life's work. We spent quite a bit of time investigating an ESOP for our company, and we hired a consultant who would have taken us there and to do that. And we decided that, given the sort of sharp growth in the business, the intense capital needs, it didn't feel like we were doing our employees any huge favors by unloading it on them. But the message is that we took the time, we made the investment to investigate that, so we didn't have any regrets about that. I would also say about legacy is that we all own our own legacy. Our legacy is based on what we did, not, so if you sell a business or you transition the ownership of the business, your legacy is what you did while you were there. And it's important to try to summarize that for yourself, for your staff, for all of your stakeholders, so that they really have the opportunity to hear it from you. We can't control what's going to happen in the future. You can't control, even if you have, ownership by many in your business. They're going to do with it what they feel is best and what's right. And you have to be able to sort of let go of that and accept that you don't own it anymore. So, but that you can, as a person, in your self-actualization, impart your learnings and your wisdom on other new startups and other businesses, which for me has been immensely gratifying in my retirement. So,
thank you, and Caroline, please, with the closing words.
Yeah, Allison, I want to thank you for what you just said, because I think it's a message that would save a lot of owners and employees a lot of heartache, to start with that in mind of it is an emotional process. It is a leave taking. So thank you. And I want to just honor that, having been through it also. But also just kind of to shift the conversation a little bit, distributed ownership doesn't have to just be about succession because of retirement. The first panel, there was a really good conversation at the end about sort of the impact of trauma, our need to do everything right, our need to do everything ourselves, learning to put on our own oxygen mask, particularly as women and as women of color and people of color. I think that these models that we're talking about can be a really good way to do that in the here and now. We've worked with a number of co-op conversions where the seller's my age, 40 something, and they are doing it for their own work-life balance, in addition to for their own legacy, to really be able to continue working for another 20, 30 years in the type of place they want to work, without being the only one deriving benefit from it. So I just sort of want to, issue that as an opening up and moving forward, that these are models that can work for a lot of different phases of business, and there's a lot of wealth of knowledge here.
Talking about a wealth of knowledge, Camille, Allison, Caroline, thank you so much for taking the time with us this morning. This has been an amazing conversation. I learned a lot. Again, there's a lot of resources in the Zoom chat, so thank you all for having me and us today. And Sarah, I'll toss it back to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm almost out of words because you all have just been so inspirational, and I'm kind of sitting with everything that I've heard. I want to echo the gratitude and you know, for being so open. And I love that we were able to kind of hear both the personal and the professional angles on this. I think it is deeply personal, and we're each humans showing up in this work every day.